The prince found the young novice fainted in the chapel, but when she awoke, she whispered something that... The chapel held the kind of silence that swallows footsteps. Candles burned low in iron sconces, beads of wax cooling in pale rings. The prince paused just inside the heavy door, his breath a ghost in the winter air, and let the darkness accept him. He knew stone. He knew how it kept a man small. He had sought this place because the world outside had made him large and loud against his will. He moved down the nave, staying to the side aisle where the light fell weakly. A draught shivered across the flagstones and drew the faint perfume of incense toward him, the sweet bite of resin after a long night of prayer. Wood creaked somewhere, no more than a board settling. From the choir grill beyond the altar, a thin chain hung motionless, a pale thread in the dark. He saw her then, not as a figure at first, but as a shape broken where none should be broken. A small body collapsed near the low altar steps, half hidden by a bench. Habit cloth darkened the pale stone. One hand extended beyond the sleeve, palm up, fingers stiff with cold. A rosary lay coiled like a fallen nest beside her, one bead missing. The cord kinked where it had snapped. His heart shifted from trouble to attention. He did not raise his voice. He went to one knee and slid his cloak between her head and the floor. Her skin was cool but not clammy. Breath came, shallow. He set 2 fingers at her neck, found the rhythm he needed. He knew enough to look for blood. He found none. The cut on her knuckle looked recent, the scab raw. The smell of vinegar lingered faintly, the household remedy of kitchens and infirmaries. Outside the circle of her stillness, the chapel kept its old order. An image of the Madonna watched from a side altar, paint darkened by smoke. A lopsided bell rope hung near the sacristy door, and there, near that door, was something wrong, a small crate that did not belong in a house of women behind a grill. It had been set down hastily and at the wrong angle, as if by a hand unused to respect. A seal pressed into red wax showed the imprint of a crowned crest. The cord that once bound it had been cut and then tied again with a rough knot, not a servant's careful touch. His gaze returned to the novice. He untied the narrow ribbon at her throat to ease her breathing, one knot, then another, and saw where her collar had chafed the skin beneath. Ink stained the side of her middle finger, the mark of hours spent with quill and margins. The discovery made no sense here near the altar. It sharpened his concern into something like a map unfolding under pressure. A candle hissed and guttered. He spoke to the quiet and to her, his voice low. "Can you hear me?" No answer, only a flutter beneath his fingertips. He slid his hand under her shoulder and lifted carefully, the way a man lifts with muscles and not pride. The habit's wool rasped against his sleeve. He tucked the cloak further around her, a mound against the cold. Her eyelashes were thick with damp. A tremor ran the length of her arm, then stopped. He put his palm just above her heart and felt the thud grow firmer. Her lips parted with a soft click of dry skin. He poured a little water from a jug left near the steps onto a kerchief and touched it to her mouth. She licked it without waking. He waited, counting time by the candle drip and the sound of his own breath. Patience was a discipline he understood. He let the chapel press in, took the measure of danger and propriety, weighed them briefly, and bent to the delicate work of bringing a stranger back from the narrow edge where she teetered. A minute passed. 2. Far away, a pigeon shifted in the rafters and cooed once, then fell silent, as if aware it had spoken out of turn. Her chest rose deeper. She twitched, tried to curl, bumped her forehead against his arm, and startled herself awake with a soft gasp. Eyes opened in confusion, wide and pleading, not for help, but for a place to set a burden too heavy for one throat. "Easy," he said. "You're safe. You fainted." "Safe," she repeated, as if the word were a room she was not allowed to enter. She touched her cheek and found his cloak, then the stone beneath. and shame crossed her face at the impropriety, quick and bruising. She tried to sit and swayed. Slowly, he steadied her with a hand just at her upper back, careful as if touching a flame. She noticed the rosary and snatched it up with a suddenness that spoke of more than piety. The broken place pricked her finger. She flinched and hissed, then wrapped the loop tighter to hide the flaw. When she lifted her head, the movement showed the thinness at her throat, a line of exhaustion drawn fine by days and nights. He saw when memory returned. Fear did not seize her. Despair did, the kind that has no audience and no theatre. Her eyes moved to the sacristy door and the crate, then to the grill, then back to him. He watched thought run a circuit inside her and fight its way toward a decision. "Do you belong here?" she asked, voice hoarse. "I belong nowhere at this hour," he said. "Tell me what brought you to the floor." "I should not speak to you." The words held more than modesty. They held calculation, and the ache of a choice already made and regretted. "I am supposed to be silent." He nodded. He could not outrun what he was, even here. Yet the chapel was more than stone tonight. It had become a place where silence might kill. He waited, the patience again, the map unfolding one careful inch. She looked past him to the light pooling around the altar candles and to the small crate in the shadows. Her mouth worked, and when she raised her hand, the rosary swayed. One bead slipped free and skidded across the stone, a small sound that echoed too loudly. They both watched it roll beneath the bench and disappear. Her breath hitched. "I am in danger," she said. He did not flinch. "From whom?" She swallowed. "From those who pretend to be what they are not. From those who come to a grill with voices soft and hands dirty." He knew clergy and courtiers whose voices could sweeten poison. He made no show of surprise. "What happened to you just now?" "I came to pray for the courage to keep quiet. I am not made for the courage it requires." She looked down at her hands. "I fell." "Were you struck?" "Not by a hand. By a thought," he said. She stared at the crate. "By what I am carrying and should not be carrying." His gaze followed hers. The crate's seal had been broken once and pressed again with a thumb to make it look whole. A careless deception. A small thing in a place that notices small things. "Who brought that box inside?" he asked. "I am not to speak names," she said. "I should not even know names. But we launder and polish and sweep under furniture where names like to hide. Look at me," he said, not as command, but as anchor. She obeyed. It cost her something visible. "If you tell me only what you must to keep yourself alive, it will be enough." A soft smile tried to rise, absurd in its fragility. "Alive is larger than my vows will permit. Your vows were never meant to make you small enough to fit inside a lie." He should not have said it. He knew the border he was walking around with careful boots. But it was also true, and truth had a way of insisting on itself in sacred places. She closed her eyes as if stamping the moment into memory. Then she leaned closer, and the cold deserted his skin where her breath reached him. "There is a paper," she whispered. "It is not supposed to exist. It bears a crest that should never have come through the grill. It was hidden where hands of our house would find it if pressed and be blamed for it. The crate. And the hem of a sleeve." Her hand went unconsciously to her forearm, gripping the cloth. "You stitched something?" he said, too softly for the knave to hear. "I stitched what I was told to keep until morning, but my hand shook when I touched it. I am not good at secrets. My needle knows it." He waited. The candle flame nearest them wavered and licked high again. Wax sent a tiny thread down its side and hardened in an instant. "What does the paper hold?" "Numbers," she said, "and a short command. Not enough words to explain why, just enough to leave others guilty. The sums are wrong for alms, wrong for repairs, wrong for the poor. They are too round and too cold. and the command speaks as if mercy were a word to be purchased and delivered at night. Where did it come from? From a ring pressed into wax that belongs to someone who prays in a voice everyone knows. He felt an old weariness lift its head, the kind that stalks a man in court and follows him even into a cloister. He kept his face still. Who gave it to you? A hand through the grill, she said. A visit like any other, with the right candles and the right words and the right courtesy. I was asked to carry a bundle because I am small and known to obey. No one notices the quiet ones until it is time to blame them. He could see the shape of it now, the method, if not the full aim, the crate with the wrong seal. A paper slipped into the way of women who could be accused of touching what should not touch them. He looked at the grill, and at the small hook where a curtain could be drawn to veil the enclosure. It was open. He imagined how easy it would be to pass a packet through at night under the pretext of devotion. You are not safe, he said. She lifted the broken rosary a fraction. No. Why tell me? Because you came in without noise, she said. Because no one else did. Because I could not hold it any longer. Because if I do not speak, someone will make me speak wrong. He drew a breath and released it slowly. What do you want to do? She looked at the altar as if it might answer, then back to him. I want to put it somewhere it will be read by eyes that will not betray me. Then I want to forget it ever existed, and I want to pay for that forgetfulness with prayer until my knees give out. He almost smiled, though nothing about the moment was light. A woman's idea of penance, a prince's idea of justice. The distance between them measured by every candle in the church, and none at all. Where's the paper now? Her hand tightened at her forearm. Hidden where it will be found whether I want it found or not. On you. Her breath shook. Yes. He heard the small sound as that admission landed between them and spread its weight over the stones. Then we must think, he said. We must move as if watched, even if we are not. We must appear to do nothing, and yet do the one thing necessary. She tried to laugh and managed a noise that sat somewhere between relief and panic. How do we do that? We rehearse calm, he said. We stand. We step aside. We behave as if you were faint, and I were a man who happened to be near. We do not touch the crate. We do not reach for your sleeve where someone might notice. We leave what is too large for our hands to those whose hands bear the right seals. But first, you breathe. He helped her to sit fully. Her palm gripped the pew edge. The habit's rough wool whispered against wood. Her head sat more surely on her neck now. He felt a slow warmth rise to his own face. Not from desire, but from the nearness of a human thing done right in a place built for it. You are very calm, she said. I am not, he answered. I am only practiced at appearing to be. Then teach me. You are learning quickly. Her mouth softened. No one has told me that before. Then someone failed you. His words fell like small stones in still water, rings expanding. He did not reach for her hand. He did not need the contact to feel the current between them. What is your name? She asked, then closed her eyes as if to take the question back. No, do not tell me. That would make it worse. He accepted the boundary she drew and the honesty of the worry beneath it. He nodded once. You should not be here, she said, and one side of her mouth curved with the knowledge that the sentence applied to both of them. I could say the same, he said. Someone outside shifted the latch. The old iron coughed. A cold line of air slid across the floor and lapped at their ankles. He heard the familiar drag of a heavy key ring against a door, the kind held by men whose duty begins before dawn. Her head snapped toward the sound. He felt her pulse jump through the air. Be steady, he said. Do not move quickly. I am not good at that either, she said through her teeth, then drew herself smaller, as if virtue could be a posture. The hinge resisted, and then gave with a moan that traveled all the way up the vault. Orange light spilled under the threshold, crawled along the stones, and climbed the legs of the nearest bench. The little flame in the sconce nearest the door leaned toward it, drawn as if by hunger. A foot crossed the threshold, then another. The lantern rose, and its circle widened, bright as judgment. "Stand if you can," he said, because two people standing looked less like a secret than one kneeling over another. She pushed herself up, swaying. He put an arm at her back without appearing to hold her. They made the picture he had designed. A gentleman caught in charity, a novice pulled back from a faint, nothing more. The light spread to the altar steps. It found their faces, their hands, the shape of the cloak under her. The smell of oiled metal reached him, and the sound of a voice clearing its way out of a chest filled the space. His own chest tightened, not with guilt, but with the knowledge that the moment for quiet action had passed. "Say nothing," he whispered, the last small rope he could throw. She gripped the rosary. The broken thread pressed into her palm until it must have hurt. She held anyway. He drew his shoulders back without thinking. He had been born to that reflex, and hated it. The lantern's glare slid down the nave like a blade, and stopped on them as the voice of authority filled the chapel with the weight of discovery. The lantern stopped on them, and held. The man behind it did not cry scandal. He stood in the doorway with his keys shining at his belt and lifted the light high enough to see without blinding. His face was seamed and grave, the face of a sacristan who knew where everything belonged and how to put it back when the night disarranged it. "God keep us," he said, and crossed himself. "Who is fallen?" "A novice," the prince answered. "She fainted." The sacristan's gaze traveled from the cloak under her head to the loosened ribbon at her throat to the angle of the rosary in her hand. He glanced at the choir grill as if measuring the wrath of enclosure. His lantern steadied. "You should not be in here with her," he said. "I agree," the prince said. "Yet here we are, and she is not well." The sacristan's mouth set. "This is a house of nuns. There are rules. There are also remedies. Where can we put her where she can breathe and not break a rule deeper than the lesser ones?" The keys chimed softly when the sacristan shifted his weight. "The guest infirmary is permitted, in extremity. It touches the public nave only." "Then we will use it." The sacristan looked at the novice, then back at him. The lantern's circle shrank and widened as his hand trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing what his first word would mean for the rest of the night. "You will state your name," he said. "Later," the prince said. "For now, call for a turn, sister. Ask for vinegar and cordial, and send word to the prioress that one of her daughters needs air." "That is not how it is done," the sacristan said. "It is how we will do it," the prince answered evenly, with the kind of calm that substitutes for a seal when none can be shown. They looked at each other long enough for the candles to make a soft spit and die. The sacristan blinked, then jerked his chin toward the side door. "Mind her head," he said, and set the lantern on a sconce. The bell at the grill rang twice, small and insistent. A shutter slid back on the revolving cupboard set into the wall. A round wooden tray turned to reveal a bottle and a folded cloth. A voice, cool and light and unmistakably in command, spoke from behind the wood. "Set her in the guest infirmary," the prioress said. "Sister Catalina will attend through the turn. Keep the nave clear." The sacristan bowed toward the grill, a bow the prioress could not see, and took the bottle. The prince did not look toward the hidden speaker. He lifted the novice again, careful to keep the cloak under her, and followed the sacristan down the short passage into a room with whitewashed walls and few comforts. The guest infirmary smelled of camphor and lavender. A brazier held a low bed of coals. A small crucifix hung on the plaster, its paint simple. The sacristan set the lantern on a stool. Light pooled like a basin around them. "Lay her there," he said. They settled her on the narrow bed. The mattress gave with a soft sigh. The prince tipped the bottle and wet the cloth, touched it to her lips, then to her temples. The sacristan uncorked a tiny vial and held it under her nose. She flinched, eyes fluttering, then stilled. "Breathe," the sacristan murmured, more to the room than to her. "Breathe, little one." The prince's fingers, more used to reins and documents than to women's garments, worked the coif's ties until the cloth loosened just enough to let her throat move freely. As he did, the inner hem by her wrist rolled back the slightest fraction. A ridge pressed against his knuckle, narrow as a reed, hidden in the cloth. Not bone, not vein. Paper. He did not look at it a second time. He saw it once and kept his eyes on her. He had learned as a boy how to let knowledge settle without grabbing it with both hands. The sacristan poured a small measure of cordial onto a spoon handed through the turn by a lay sister, whose steady hand appeared and then disappeared like an obedient ghost. He coaxed it between the novice's lips. She swallowed, coughed, and tears sprang to her lashes. The sacristan wiped them with the corner of the cloth, practical as a man mopping a floor, tender as one who has done this too often to make a noise about it. "Better," he said to no one in particular. "Thank you," the prince said. The sacristan squinted at him. "You speak like a man who expects to be obeyed." "I speak like a man who asks properly," the prince said. Behind the turn, a small bell rapped once. Then, the prioress again. "Brother Martin, when she is steady, inform me. Keep the door between the nave and the infirmary shut." "Yes, mother," the sacristan said aloud, and glanced at the prince with a private warning. "Names are not thrown around in here." "Understood," the prince said. A bead clicked under his boot. He slipped his hand down and found the small sphere against the floorboard. He rolled it into his palm and held it there. The rosary on the bed lay one bead short. He closed his fingers. The sacristan watched the motion and then pretended he had not. He busied himself with the brazier, easing an ember to life with a careful breath. He was the kind of man who knew when to be blind. The novice's eyelids quivered again. She took a deeper breath, then opened her eyes to a ceiling that seemed to surprise her by not being the one she expected. She turned her head a fraction and saw the sacristan, the lantern, the prioress's turn. Her hand flinched to her sleeve. The prince saw the movement and the quick fear that traveled through it. "Drink a little more," the sacristan said, and offered the spoon. She did. Her mouth twisted at the taste, then softened. She fixed on the sacristan's face as if it were the only safe object in the room. "I fell," she said. "No shame in a body telling you it has had enough," he said. "Do you feel pain?" "Only in my pride," she said. "Pride is often the first to bruise," he answered with a glance toward the prince, as if to acknowledge the line drawn across the floor. She saw the man who had lifted her and flushed. Her hand moved under the blanket, gathering the habit tighter, the motion automatic, an attempt to put cloth where honor fears a draft. He stepped back a pace, giving her distance. "Forgive me," she said, not knowing who she addressed. "There is nothing to forgive," the sacristan said. "You did not order the air to be thin." She swallowed and shut her eyes for a heartbeat. When she opened them, the room had become a place where she could hold still without drowning. "Mother?" she asked, looking at the turn. "She knows," the sacristan said. "She speaks through the turn for now. The rule is not a fence to keep help out. It is a trellis to guide it." The prioress's voice returned, thinner through wood. "Child, you will stay there until your strength settles. Brother Martin will attend at the door. Sister Catalina will send what you need. Say only what is necessary. Pray in your heart. We will speak when the sun rises." The novice let out a breath that bent in the middle. "Yes, mother." The prince stepped toward the threshold as if to leave, then stopped. He could feel the bead in his palm like a small oath. He did not know what to do with it and so did nothing. He had learned that restraint could be as decisive as action. The sacristan wiped the spoon and hung it on a nail. He stood in the doorway, shoulders filling the frame, a man fitted to his place like a key to a lock. "You from the town?" he asked the prince, Not curious exactly, but collecting the basic data a building requires. From outside it, the prince said. Passing through? Seeking quiet. Found something else. The sacristan's tone lacked accusation. It tasted of old stone and the humor that keeps old stone from crushing a man's chest. You should go. I will, when I should, the prince said. And when is that? When she can keep her feet. When someone else can watch her breathe. The sacristan considered and nodded once. Close the door. It keeps whispers from growing teeth. They left the infirmary door on its latch, not shut tight, but pulled to. The light inside became a wedge on the floor, neat and survivable. The sacristan and the prince stood in the nave like men who have no quarrel but share a problem. A soft bell tolled from somewhere above, one measured stroke that meant nothing more than time moving its shoulder. The chapel received it and returned to its discipline. The prince inhaled. The air tasted of wax and wood and the thin metal note of a key ring. He thought of the crate by the sacristy, of the line of thread inside a sleeve, of the narrowness of a life that had been forced to carry what it should never have touched. He felt again the pressure to state a name. He held it down. Brother Martin, he said quietly, the convent will need a physician. I've sent for the old one who serves the layfolk near the gate, the sacristan answered. He minds his tongue. He knows we have our ways. Good. The prince nodded toward the grill. And the prioress? She knows what she needs to know, the sacristan said. And no more. It keeps everyone righteous. Sometimes righteousness is silence. Sometimes, the prince said with a thread of weariness that made no sound. They both turned their heads at the same moment. Hooves, muffled by damp earth, struck the cloister yard. The sound approached at a pace that did not apologize for the hour. A horse breathed and stamped. A voice called for the gate to be opened with the clipped tone of someone trained to speak to doors as if they were servants. The sacristan's mouth tightened. Now what? He murmured, and moved quickly to the porch. The prince followed, stopping in the shadow where nave met threshold. The outer wicket slid open, then wider. A man dismounted in one movement and straightened, his cloak edged with frost that had not yet melted. He carried a leather case bound with a strap. His brow was red from the cold, his jaw set in a line carved by long miles and harder orders. By authority of the king, he said to the sacristan, holding up a packet pressed with wax. A summons. This is a house of women, the sacristan said, not by way of refusal, but as a catechism. It is also a house with a door, the courier replied. I hand the paper to someone who can read it to the one to whom it is addressed. To whom is it addressed? The courier looked down at the seal, then up again, as if the question required a trumpet. He narrowed his eyes, calculating whether to announce a title inside a convent before being asked. Duty 1. To His Highness the Prince of Asturias, he said, clear and unadorned, and the words lifted and flowed into the nave like water poured on stone. The sacristan did not look over his shoulder. He kept his face still as a wall. He took the packet with both hands and bowed as if the gesture could disguise the quake in his stomach. The prince is not here, he said. The courier's mouth almost twitched, and then did not. He will be where he must be when dawn strikes. The summons makes it law. What matter calls him? The sacristan asked, buying time like a man putting coins down on a table one at a time instead of in a pile. The matter that always calls him at that hour, the courier said, more to himself than to the sacristan. Court. He shifted, colder now that he had stopped moving. The horse shook its head and made the bit jingle, a small music against the quiet of the cloister. Behind the sacristan, the prince stood very still. The title had broken his cover as neatly as a blade cuts a cord. The prioress would have heard it where she stood at the turn. The novice might have heard it in the infirmary, if breath and heartbeat had left room for words to carry that far. The sacristan turned, his face unchanged. His eyes met the prince's briefly, asking a question he did not put into the air. The prince nodded once. The sacristan's shoulders rose and fell in a breath that began a pattern neither of them would later remember choosing. He held out the packet. "This found you, Highness," he said, as if the title were a thing placed on a table between them that they both would prefer to ignore. The prince took the summons. The wax was cold. The ring impressed in it was one he had kissed with his father's hand on it. He broke it and glanced at the contents. The words did not surprise him. They hardly needed to be written. They were the script of his mornings. He folded the paper again and slid it into his glove. He looked past the sacristan to where the infirmary door stood, a dark rectangle with a slice of light. "How long until the physician arrives?" he asked. "Not long." "Send for the bishop's vicar as well," the prince said. "Tell him the convent requests his counsel." "I can tell him that," the sacristan said. "It will also be true." The sacristan took that in with a small tilt of his head. He did not ask what business a vicar had in a matter begun with a fainting novice. He did not need to ask. He had noticed the crate with the wrong seal before he had turned his lantern on the strange tableau in the nave. "A gift for the house," the prince said, and drew from his inner pocket a small purse. The sacristan did not reach for it. "The prioress receives alms," he said. "Then give it to her from a man who stumbled in at the wrong hour and hopes to have done one thing right before he goes." The sacristan took the purse without looking at it and slipped it into his sleeve as if it were no different from a nail or a pinch of salt. "Tell her also this," the prince said, "that the physician is for the novice and the vicar is for the house. No names, only the order of care." The sacristan's mouth might have almost smiled. "We will keep your order if it keeps us from worse disorder." They returned to the infirmary. The novice watched the door as if she could hear through wood with more than ears. Her hands lay quiet, palms down on the blanket, but the tendons along her wrist told a different story. "The physician comes," the sacristan said. She looked at the prince once, quickly, as if the glance could be counted and measured. He put his hand to his breast, and after a second's deliberation, let his fingers curl around the bead and then withdraw empty. The bead settled into his glove's pocket. The moment made a small stretch in the air between them. "You will be looked after," he said. "If you need anything, ask Brother Martin." She swallowed, twice, to make her voice steady. "What do I call you?" "Nothing," he said. "It is safest." Her eyes flicked in fear, then in a silent assent that hurt. "Then thank you, nothing," she said. And the words sounded like the kind of humor that only people caught at the sharp end of a rule can manage. He inclined his head. "Rest. Do not explain more than is asked." "I am not good at that," she said, and then surprised them both by smiling, brief and real. "Learn," he said. He stepped back. The room wavered in his sight for a heartbeat, as if he had stood too quickly. He put a palm against the doorframe and felt the stones cool. "Highness." The sacristan kept the title low and close, and made it useful instead of showy. "Dawn is not a suggestion." "I know," the prince said. He moved into the nave again. The candles had burned down further, pools of wax widening like maps of small countries. The crate by the sacristy crouched where it had been, invisible to anyone who was not already looking for it. He did not even glance at it. He reached the porch where the courier waited with his horse. Frost feathered the edge of the steps. The sky beyond the cloister roof had lifted one shade lighter, the light that pretends not to be light yet. "Your Highness," the courier said, and held the reins and the sealed case that had held the summons, as if to offer him something to throw across his own neck. "Wait," the prince said. "You will carry a word back. Tell them I received the summons in a place where the rule is stronger than a trumpeter's lungs. Tell them dawn will find me in my place." The courier nodded once, allowing himself a fraction of relief that his ride would not be longer. He glanced past the prince into the cloister, curious and professional. The sacristan moved in the doorway to block the sight line, as natural as a tree growing. The prince turned his head. In the corridor that led toward the interior of the convent, a lantern moved, slow enough to be part of the building. The prioress held it. She had not crossed the line of the grill. She did not need to. She lifted the light the tiniest amount when she saw him, an acknowledgement without benediction, and then lowered it again, a signal that ties could be made with simple gestures. He bowed his head the smallest fraction. It was the only courtesy permitted between a man and a woman whose authority did not overlap, but had found a way to stand side by side for a moment without scandal. He put his boot in the stirrup. Leather creaked. Breath steamed. The horse shifted its weight, eager to do the thing it was built to do. The prince looked once more toward the infirmary door, barely a shadow in the deeper shadow, and felt the old pull of duty and the new ache of something he could not name and did not dare to own. He swung into the saddle. The courier passed him the reins without looking up. He gathered them and set his hand. The sacristan stepped back. The prioress's lantern moved, and then stilled, a star behind stone. A figure in the arcade turned its hooded head and fixed him with a stillness that learned the shape of his back for later. Dawn did not gild the palace so much as reveal it. The prince rode through the gate before the sun cleared the rooftops, hooves ringing once and then swallowed by the vast inner court. Frost held to the cobbles in the shadows, patchy and stubborn, like truths that refused warmth. A porter moved the bar with a grunt and looked everywhere but at the rider's face. Servants already carried trays, candles guttered in windows. The smell of ash and wool came in small gusts from open doors. He dismounted without waiting for a groom. The courier who had found him at the convent fell in half a pace behind, the distance of duty, saying nothing now that his message slept in a glove. The antechamber breathed cold onto anyone who crossed it. He handed his cloak to a waiting boy, the cloth falling heavy and damp in the child's small arms, and felt the weight of his absence from the palace settle onto his shoulders, just as he stepped back into its light. The great corridor leading to the audience chamber had been swept before cock-crow. A thin scatter of sand still lay where feet would pass, to catch slips in the cold. Tapestries watched from the walls, their great sown fields and heroic mills never touched by winter. A gentle scrape of leather on stone, a cough smothered in cloth, whispers kept to eyes. He knew how to walk here, neither too fast nor too slow, the measured pace of a man who is not hunted and does not hunt, who is expected and cannot be denied, who will be judged nearest the end of the queue, so the judges may work up to him. He paused at the threshold and pressed his fingers once over the place where he held the small bead in his glove. The stone beneath him did not care about small beads. He knew that. He cared anyway. The chamber opened like a mouth to receive him. Men of the court stood in little knots, their silk showing the hour, their eyes the weather. Across the room a door stood ajar to a smaller oratory where candles burned low, necessary piety for the day's show. He took his place in the line that led to the table where petitions would be heard and decrees read. To his left, a master of the robes spoke softly to a clerk and glanced at him just once, up and down, the quick swipe of a man tallying mended dignity. To his right, a chamberlain folded a paper and slid it into his sleeve with care that wanted to be seen and not seen. "You were difficult to find," the chamberlain said mildly, stepping closer. "We sent a summons." "I received it," the prince said. "You chose your hour well." "Some hours choose us," the chamberlain returned, and offered a cool smile so thin it could have been a blade. "There is to be a service of thanksgiving." "For what?" the prince asked. "For the continual mercy that sustains the realm," the chamberlain said, eyes moving past the prince's shoulder, as if the mercy currently being discussed stood there. "A church will be convenient." "Which church?" "Whichever one has sufficient candles," the chamberlain said, and made the remark sound like a joke and not like a fishhook. A low murmur moved through the chamber. A junior secretary drifted near with a sheaf of folded papers and a smell of fresh ink. He didn't look at the prince directly. He cleared his throat as if it were a form of address. "There's talk," he said to no one, because to speak to someone here was to be seen choosing, of the heir's devotions being fervent. Fervent devotions rarely choose public hours, the chamberlain said, the joke's second edge showing now. The prince turned his head the fraction needed to make silence into answer. The old ritual began. Names were called, requests presented, petitioners needing grain to travel, soldiers needing their arrears, a widow needing a decision about a dowry held up by a cousin's stubbornness. The prince's own matters were named. A dispatch sent to a governor, a letter from a captain at the border, a list of repairs for a fortress roof. He gave what he was required to give, sign and sanction, and held back what he would have preferred to spend, the sharpness of a precise order, the correction that would put a lazy hand in motion. He did not force his will here. He had learned when the appearance of unanimity served him better than the thing itself. A senior cleric crossed the chamber's end and stepped into the oratory doorway for the length of a breath, long enough to be noticed, short enough to be explained as chance. His sleeve brushed the curtain and left a trace of wax on it. A murmur rose again, like pigeons in a high roof when a noise disturbs them, and they flutter to new perches without ever leaving. The prince felt the weight of a pair of eyes from across the room, and did not seek their source. The air around him thickened with the knowledge that someone had followed his shadow from the cloister to the palace. All that was required now was the right phrase in the right ear, and a simple act, helping a fainted woman to a bed set aside for emergencies, would be painted in unflattering colors and held up to the light. He kept his face steady enough to set a plumb line by it. When the last paper had been read and the last formula spoken, the chamber's tone loosened the tiniest degree. Men slid toward the doors, toward breakfast fires and small alliances. The chamberlain paused near the prince again. "You will attend the service," he said, and did not inflect it as a question. "I will attend where duty asks me to stand," the prince said. "Duty," the chamberlain said, as if tasting the word to see if it was ripe. "There is a great deal of that these days." The prince inclined his head and let the moment pass. He left the chamber by a side corridor, unwanted attention at his back like a draft. A page hurried to keep up, and then fell away when the prince lifted a hand to absolve him of attendance. The small door to the outer court stood open to let wood be carried through. He stepped out into a square of weak sunlight and drew it into his lungs like a man winding a broken clock, turning the key carefully. He would return to the convent. Not to hide. To keep a vow he had made without words to a woman who had whispered a knife into his ear and then held her breath, as if doing so might keep the blade from cutting. He took the smaller gate, the one used by servants and messengers, and did not call for an escort. The ride back down to the edge of the city took the shape of a thought. Spare, direct, disciplined. He did not gallop. He did not slink. He passed through morning markets where women shook out skins of water onto dust, where bread's crust sang when it met the baker's knife, where a beggar raised 2 fingers vaguely in his direction and dropped them again, not recognizing, only blessing, because blessing had become a habit in exchange for coins. At the convent, the outer gate stood as it had stood before dawn, bland and tough. He rapped the wicket with a knuckle and waited. Brother Martin slid the small panel back and peered through with one eye. "You should not be back," the sacristan said. "And yet," the prince said, "I am here." The sacristan closed the panel, slid the bolt, and opened the wicket wide enough to admit a man used to fitting himself through narrow spaces. He wore his keys like a promise. His mouth did not move much when he spoke. "Words have flown," he said. "They always do. The prioress knows a storm smells like this." "Where is she?" the prince asked. "Where she belongs," the sacristan answered. "Behind wood that turns and grills that do not." "And the novice?" "In her cell," he said. "You left her when she was an emergency. Now she is a rule." "I left her when I had to. Now I have to do something else." The sacristan's eyes narrowed. "We are not a theater," he said. "We do not receive princes for visits. I did not come for a visit." I came to keep her from being crushed under the cogs of something she never built." The sacristan stared at him until the word cogs turned into the shape of wheels turning in the prince's head. Then he jerked his chin toward the parlourtory door. "You can speak to a wall," he said. "She will hear if she is brought to the other side of it by her superior, and you will be seen by anyone who cares to look." "Good," the prince said. "Let the danger be honest." They walked the porch to a narrow door whose frame had been polished by generations of hands. The sacristan knocked once, twice. The turn opened the width of a breath. The prioress's voice came through unruffled in its calm. "Brother Martin." "Mother," he said. "A petitioner asks for the use of the parlor for a brief word." "Name him," she said. "Not in the hearing of grills," he said. A pause. The crack in the wood widened until the sacristan could lean and speak through it. The prince looked at the floor and counted his breath to 5, then down again. The prioress replied in the tone one saves for the balancing of weights. "The parlor will be used for 10 minutes, she said. "The turn will be open. The grill will be shut fully. Sister Catalina will stand within hearing." The sacristan looked at the prince and lifted his eyebrows. "You see." "I see," the prince said, upstairs of his own voice. "Thank you." He entered the parlor and took the chair furthest from the grill, the way a man sits in a confessional if he misguidedly believes distance equals discretion. The parlor contained what such rooms always contained: 2 chairs, a small table, a crucifix above iron mesh. Dust floated in the air like the remainder of someone else's prayer. He sat with his back straight and his hands on his knees, the bead a pebble against his gloved palm. The grill darkened. A shadow moved behind it. Then the novice stood in the other room, half her face lit and half in shade, the line running down her features like a parting between 2 possible days. A second figure stood just behind her shoulder, silent, presence only. Sister Catalina doing as ordered, eyes lowered, ears open. The prince did not lean forward. He did not lift a hand to the mesh. He spoke as if reading a letter to a wall, and the wall would pass it on. "You will be asked harsh questions soon," he said. "You must speak simply." "Simple does not mean safe," she said, matching his distance with her own. Her voice had steadied. "The prioress told me I am to keep silence about what is not mine." "She is right," he said. "She also knows that silence can be made a weapon." The novice's fingers tightened around her rosary. The knot where the bead had broken looked clumsy now and proud of itself. "I am punished," she said. "Bread and water today, reclusion for a time. To show that I guard my tongue from the world and from myself. Punishment is a word priests use for shelter when they cannot admit to fear," he said. Her breath hitched, half a laugh and half a swallow. "You should not say that to a grill." "I say it to you," he said. Sister Catalina stirred behind her, a cloth moving in respectful discomfort. The novice kept her gaze on the iron. The little squares of it cut his view of her mouth into a mosaic. It made truth look like something one must piece back together by hand. "Will they ask about you?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "And will you answer?" "I will answer what helps you," he said. "And what keeps the larger thing from breaking in a way that hurts the wrong people?" "You speak as if the truth were a house to be propped from the outside," she said. "Sometimes it is," he said. "Sometimes you are the one inside while others look for a post to brace." She was quiet. In the pause he heard, through the wall, the faint rhythm of steps on the corridor stone outside the parlor, the regular route of a woman tasked with keeping time. The walls here held sounds as if they were soup ladled out carefully. Nothing was wasted. "The prioress said a physician came," he said. "He did," the novice said. "He is kind in the way of men who know their limits. He told me to drink and to stop thinking. I told him I could do one." "Which?" "Drink," she said, and a little smile slid into the mesh and made the iron seem less hostile. The prioress has taken my work away for today. She made me kneel for a while without words, and then gave me a psalm when my knees trembled too much. Is the paper safe? He asked, low. Her eyes flickered. She answered without answering. Nothing is safe, she said. That is not a complaint. Good, he said. You must keep hold of that thought, as if it were a rope. Who is pulling on the other end? She asked. People who do not like to be seen, he said. Then why are you here, where anyone can see you? She asked, and the question came out tender and severe both. Because hiding myself will not hide you, he said. She breathed once, slow. He thought he saw the line of her throat move. Sister Catalina shifted and then stilled again, the habit's wool whispering in a tone as soft as forgiveness. I do not know how to stand in two worlds, the novice said. One tells me to keep my eyes low. The other keeps telling me to lift them and tell you what I saw. You did tell me, he said. That matters. Does it? She asked. It feels as if I cupped water in my hands and now can do nothing but watch it drip. Matters do not always move at the pace of feeling, he said. Sometimes they move at the pace of stone. She let her head rest against the grill for the space of 2 breaths. The iron took the weight and gave back a mark that would fade. She closed her eyes and opened them, asking a question without words that he answered without sound. Yes. The 10 minutes were nearly up. He felt the end of them approach, as one feels a curtain approach one's fingers in a draught. He got to his feet, almost at the same moment she moved back, both reluctant, both compliant. Sister, he said, and let the title be the whole of what was safe to say aloud. Do what the prioress asks. Tell her you will obey. Obedience is a shelter when eyes begin to search for your bones. If you are asked about me, say that a man helped you rise and left when told. It is true, she said, and the small mercy of the truth warmed the room. And if you are asked about anything else, choose the smallest sentence that keeps you from lying. She nodded. You speak as if you have done this before. I speak as if I have survived it, he said. A soft knock at the inner door signaled the end. Sister Catalina's hand lifted and pressed to the novice's arm, a light warning. The novice bowed her head, then looked up once more, quickly, to hold him the way one holds a candle's last steady shape in the memory. Be careful, she said. I cannot, he said, but I can be deliberate. The grill went dark. The door on the convent side closed with a decisive small sound. He stood very still and let the absence expand until it found its proper size. He did not speak into it. When he opened the parlor door to the outer corridor, the sacristan was there, a figure made of straight lines and caution. You have stirred a pond with a spear, Brother Martin said. The fish are coming up to look. Let them look, the prince said. I would rather have eyes than knives in the dark. Eyes bring knives, the sacristan said. They always have. Then we will know where they point. They walked the length of the nave together. The cold found his ankles again and licked up his calves. He wondered how long he could stay before the palace would pull him back with the string of expectation he had felt tied to his wrist since boyhood. He reached the porch and paused. I will return, he said. No, the sacristan said. You will come if called by the right mouth with the right seals. Until then, you will let women do the work they were made to do, which is to hold a house upright in a wind. That is not only women's work, he said. Today it is, the sacristan said, and turned away to tend a wick that had guttered. The prince stepped into the cloister's arcade to reach the outer gate. As he set his hand to the door, a movement down the corridor caught his eye, a shadow that did not move like a nun. A hood lifted enough to show the line of a jaw. The figure from before dawn, drawn to the same door by the same gravity, had found him again. The man's gaze fixed on the parlor door behind the prince, and then sliced back to measure the breadth of the prince's shoulders and the set of his head. He did not bow. He did not speak. The prince pushed the gate and stepped into the court. not hurrying, not lingering. He felt the stare between his shoulder blades like a brand cooling. Inside, the novice left the parlor and moved down the corridor to her cell, the step she had learned for this hour, when bells ask nothing but presence. Sister Catalina went with her, and then peeled off toward the kitchen. The prioress stood at a window slit and let the thin winter light cross her face, the law of her house in the tilt of her head. The prince reached his horse. He pulled the stirrup down and waited a beat, no more, then mounted. He did not look back, but he did not need to. He could feel one larger shape turning slowly behind him, aligning itself to point at a small cell in a women's house where a young novice had learned too much about how men use paper. He had taken 3 steps from the parlor door into the arcade when a voice he did not recognize, smooth and low and hatefully pleased, floated out of the shadow and fixed its barbs in the very air. "The novice has ensnared the prince." The words hung in the cold like a stain. The prince did not turn toward the hood. He did not ask who had spoken. He let the courtyard carry the sentence to the corners where such sentences collect and grow teeth. Brother Martin stepped between them without appearing to. Keys chimed. His eyes held a tired warning. "Go," the sacristan murmured, before a second mouth repeats it with better aim. The prince's jaw eased. He did not waste breath on denial. He pulled the gate and stepped through into the outer court. Hooves struck stone outside the wall. A small troop, no trumpets, just the clip of purpose. The sacristan glanced once at the prioress's darkened window, then set his hand to the wicket. "Open," a voice commanded, formal and used to being obeyed. "In the king's name and the church's." Brother Martin raised the bar. Men entered with the damp of the morning still on their cloaks. They wore the sober black of officials who carry writs and expect to read them aloud. An alguazil kept his hand near the hilt he hoped not to use. A royal notary stood among them, neat and almost delicate, the mouth of a man who liked ink to behave. The prince moved aside, not hiding, not announcing himself. The prioress's lantern appeared in the inner arcade. She did not cross any line she was not allowed to cross. She stopped where enclosure stopped her, and held the light as if light were a law. "Who calls?" she asked from her rightful shadow. "Officers of the Holy Office," the leader said, lifting a document, "and a notary of the king's household. We require to question a novice named Inez on matters touching the faith and, by rumor, the honor of the heir." The word honor traveled through the space like a knife carried on a velvet tray. The prioress did not breathe louder because of it. "Enclosure stands," she said. "Questioning will be at a grill in my house. Or not at all. I will have the bishop's vicar present." "You will have us," the official said, "and the law." "You will have the vicar," the prioress repeated. "Send your man. We will send ours. Until then, the child remains under my rule." The notary's eyes slid to the prince and widened, then narrowed, a quick calculation. He bowed only halfway, the way a man bows to a fact he does not enjoy. "Highness," he said softly, as if the title might be a private thing between them. "We did not expect to find you in a house of women." "You often find me where men whisper," the prince said. "Is your business whispers?" "Our business is clarity," the notary said, "and the swift mending of any rents." "A convent is a place that knows how to mend," the prince said. "You will keep your pace to theirs." Brother Martin slipped out through the little door and disappeared into lanes that knew his stride. The officers shifted, unused to being made to stand like statues in a cloister. The alguazil stamped his feet to warm them and kept his eyes on his boots. The prioress did not lower her lantern. In the novice's cell, Inez sat on her pallet, hands folded, face emptied of everything that might be useful to an enemy. Sister Catalina knelt beside her. Their heads touched once, deliberately. The prioress's voice came down the corridor, steady and low. "Child." Inez stood immediately. "Mother." "You will go to the chapter house," the prioress said. "You will sit. You will answer direct questions with direct answers. You will not answer the questions that are not asked. You will not seek to protect what is not your duty to protect. You will not confess anything that belongs to another office than mine. Yes, Mother. You will trust that God's law is larger than the voices in the porch, the prioress said. Inez nodded. I am afraid, she said, and the admission felt like opening a hand she had kept clenched since before dawn. Good, the prioress said. Fear keeps fools from being born in moments like these. They went together, the older woman's light making a moving island on the stones. Sister Catalina walked behind, her lips moving in a prayer she did not toss into the air. The chapter house waited with its long bench and its crucifix and its smell of damp oak. This was their court, not a theater, and Inez understood that if she held to its grain, she might not splinter. The officers entered, hats in hand in the presence of things older than their hats. The royal notary took a place to the right, with a writing case, and laid out his pen and his sand as if arranging cutlery for a fine meal. The prince stood back, near a column, where he could see without being seen first. Brother Martin slipped in through a side door, breath steady despite the run, and behind him the bishop's vicar came, cloak dark with sweat under the arms, where a horse's speed had paid for the distance. The vicar bowed to the prioress because the house required it. He nodded to the officers because politics required it. He did not nod to the prince. Recognition passed quietly, the way modest people greet each other at wakes. We are convened, the prioress said. Proceed. The official of the Holy Office read, as men read when they wish to remind you that time belongs to them. He cited authority. He cited rumor. He cited a concern for the soul of a novice who might have wandered into the path of temptation and the person of a prince who might have been lured from the straight road by snares. Inez kept her eyes on the wood grain of the table in front of her. She tracked each line as if it were a sentence in scripture. Name? The official said. Inez, she said. Family? He asked. I was given to this house, she said. My family is the one I found here. Last night, the notary said smoothly. You were found in the nave with a gentleman who is not a brother of this convent. I fainted, she said. A man helped me stand. Do you know his name? The notary asked, the question tossed as bait. Inez looked straight at the crucifix, then at the prioress, then at the vicar. I know that he did not cross the grill, she said. I know that the sacristan called for help. I know that I was carried where the rule allows. The vicar's head moved, a half-degree, enough to place a blessing on her sentence without speaking one. Did this man touch you improperly? The official asked, voice cool. Inez's cheeks warmed, her fingers dug into her palms until the little crescent moons stung. He touched me as one touches a sick person, she said, with care and with distance. Would you know him again? The notary asked. I am not a child, she said, and felt the prioress's silent correction at her side. Be careful. She lowered her eyes. Yes. The notary's sand bottle sat on the table like a clock that did not tick. He turned to the vicar. A more serious matter, the notary said. We have information that this novice has handled correspondence behind the grill, of a sort not meant for her hands, and that the matter touches the king's household. We ask that she be searched, and that any paper found be delivered to the law. The chapter house drew breath. The prioress did not move, but her lantern hand tightened, and light shivered against the wall. Enclosure protects the person, she said. If you will search, you will say what you seek, and you will have a woman's hands do it, and you will not put shame where it does not belong. We seek a document bearing a crest, the notary said. We seek proof of a misdirection of funds, and a directive that— Proof, the prince said from the column, very lightly, almost like a cough. Proof is a word that does not require a novice to be shamed, to be shown. The officers turned their heads. The notary blinked at the interruption, then smiled the smile of a man who believes a trout has risen to the fly. Highness, he said, and bowed properly, since he had no choice. "You are concerned." "I am concerned for the truth," the prince said, "and for the dignity of a house that has less power to defend itself than mine." "Dignity and truth are served by openness," the notary said, "and by promptness, and sometimes by confession." The vicar lifted a hand, not to silence, but to shape the air. "A compromise," he said. "We will permit a search by the prioress's own hand in the presence of Sister Catalina and myself. If a paper is found, it will be placed under my seal immediately. No man will lay a hand on the novice. No man will speak to her while she is being searched. We will then examine the nature of the paper and its proper jurisdiction." "Jurisdiction," the official said, as if the taste displeased him. "This concerns faith." "It concerns honesty," the vicar said, "and that is my remit today." The prioress gestured. Inez stood, knees abruptly unsure. Sister Catalina led her to a small side room. The door did not close all the way. It did not need to. Silence worked like cloth. It hid without lying. The prince kept his eyes down. He imagined the fine tremor in the novice's fingers as they unwound the hasty basting. He remembered the hard ridge under his knuckle and the way her voice had frayed when she said the word numbers. He felt the bead in his glove and pressed it into his palm until its roundness imprinted there. They returned. The prioress carried a folded sheet, pinched between two fingers as if it were a thorn. She did not pass it to the notary. She laid it on the table between herself and the vicar and stepped back. The vicar broke the fold, not fully, just enough to see what he needed to see. He did not read it aloud. He traced the watermark with the edge of his nail. He looked at the date. He closed it again and placed his seal against the fold. The wax held, a red circle over a secret that had just narrowed its possible paths. "It bears a chancery watermark," he said quietly. "It bears a crest that should not travel in this fashion. It bears a date that does not sit comfortably with the story implied by our visitors." The notary stiffened, then recovered. "Let us see it." "You will not," the vicar said. "Not until I have determined whether what it contains belongs here or across the river." The notary flushed to the ears, then smiled with a grace that came from decades of practice. "There is also this," he said, and drew from his case a second sheet. Ink still gleamed. "A copy of a letter between persons. Under care. It speaks of a meeting unbecoming. It speaks of a novice rash with her eyes and a prince rash with his hands." He laid it on the table with a flourish one notch too theatrical for the room. The officers leaned toward it as if warmth radiated from lies. The prioress did not touch it. The sacristan did not even look at it. The prince kept his face quiet. He had seen this tactic. Smear, then demand defense, then claim guilt from the fact of defense. "Read," the notary urged. "No," the vicar said. "Copies are theater. If originals exist, we will find their litters. If not, we will not make a show with scraps." "Highness," the notary said, pouncing sideways, "do you deny meeting a novice in a nave before dawn?" "I deny nothing," the prince said calmly. "I state that I found a woman fainting and acted as any Christian would. I state that I left when asked. I state that I now stand in the only place where shame belongs when men try to do with rumor what they cannot do with law." The notary's smile thinned. "Such bravery," he said. "So eloquent." "Do not mistake stamina for eloquence," the prince said. "I am tired of this kind of work." The official moved to reassert control. "We will take the novice into custody," he said, "for safety." "Safety is a word being abused in this room," the prioress said very evenly. "No." "You have no authority to refuse," the official said. "She has authority in her house," the vicar said, his patience wearing very thin and becoming something harder. "And I have authority to keep you from making fools of yourselves." Brother Martin cleared his throat, not loudly. "Mother," he said, eyes on the floor, "may I speak what I saw with my old eyes?" "Speak," the prioress said. "In the sacristy, near the door, a crate stood in the wrong place at the wrong hour," he said. It bore a royal seal that had been cut and tied again, as if the hand that did it had learned knots in a stable, not a counting room. "It is gone now." The notary's pen scratched, faster than was dignified. "And this crate was not brought in by this house," the sacristan said. "We are women, and one man whose keys sleep where I sleep. We do not admit men with crates at ours when daughters faint in naves." The vicar's mouth went into a thoughtful line. He turned to the prioress. "Mother, forgive me. I need a pair of steady hands and a minute near your altar." Her eyebrow lifted. She understood without being told. "Sister Catalina," she said. They left the chapter house and moved the short distance to the church. The officers balked at the threshold and then came because they did not wish to be accused of shying from consecrated air. The nave waited as they had left it. Candles had been reset by a lay sister whose order could not be bullied. The prioress went to the readable and slid her hand along a seam behind the carved saint. Sister Catalina's fingers found a catch. A narrow hollow opened, hardly more than a pocket. A thin ledger lay inside, bound in plain skin, as unremarkable as a loaf of bread. The sacristan made a little sound he did not intend to make. The prioress set the ledger on the altar rail. The vicar placed his ring against it, as if it were a forehead to be blessed, and then opened it to the middle. The ink inside was 2 sets of hands, one calm, one hurried. Margins carried marks, initials that carried meanings only men who live in counting rooms recognize. "This does not sing," the vicar murmured. "It grinds." "It was not ours," the prioress said, "but it has been in our wall." The vicar closed the book. He did not wave it like a flag. He held it like something that could burn fingers. He resealed it and nodded once to the prioress. They returned to the chapter house with it under his arm, not displayed, simply carried. The notary's eyes lit before he could prevent it. He reached. He did not touch. The vicar set the ledger on the table and put his hand on top of it. "This," he said, "is now under the church's seal. It will go nowhere without my decision. The novice remains under the prioress's guard. I grant a stay of removal. You, sir," he added to the notary without looking at him, "will return with your authority clarified and your provenance ready to withstand daylight. If you cannot do that, do not come again with folded copies and calls to piety." The official took a breath through his teeth and shut his mouth on whatever had been ready there. He did not know how to fight a man who refused to fight in the way he had come prepared to provoke. The notary gathered his case with care that pretended to be calm. He turned to the prince and bowed a fraction deeper than customary because he now needed to show respect for a thing he had failed to subdue. "Highness," he said, "we will look forward to your presence at the service arranged in your honor." "The service will be for God," the prince said. "Not for me. Bring your prayers." The men filed out. The alguazil looked relieved. The officer looked thwarted. The notary looked busy. Silence resettled, a flock returning to its beam. The prioress lowered her lantern. The vicar exhaled. Inez, who had not moved like a statue for what felt to her like an hour, held above the ground by wires, sat when the prioress touched her shoulder. "You did well," the prioress said, and allowed the warmth in her voice to be heard by everyone. Inez nodded and then shook. A reaction delayed until there was permission for it. Sister Catalina pressed a cup into her hands. The water tasted like life. The prince stood very still and let his gaze move at last to her face. She did not look back immediately. When she did, the glance lasted only a beat. It was enough. It carried a compact. Each would shoulder his share of the cost. He did not speak to her. He spoke to the vicar. "You will need protection," he said. "Not for your person, for your work. Men will try to make this ledger disappear or to explode in the wrong room." "I know how to keep doors closed," the vicar said. "I also know when to open one." "Good," the prince said. He turned to the prioress. "Mother, I have been an intrusion in your house. I cannot undo that. I can only ask that you take this intrusion and make it a thing your daughters can live with." "We make everything a thing we can live with," the prioress said. "It is our profession." They looked at each other as two rulers look when their territories touch without war. She inclined her head slightly, the acknowledgement of an ally who will not become a friend. Inez set the cup down and rose on legs that felt borrowed, then owned again. The rosary slid in her fingers. The knot where the bead should have sat touched her skin like the memory of a bruise. The prince made to leave, the vicar at his side. Brother Martin held the door. In the doorway, the prince paused and pressed his thumb against the small round in his glove. He had kept it without knowing why. He knew now. He looked at the prioress. "A thing was lost," he said. "I will return it when the time is right." "We are patient," the prioress said. He inclined his head to Inez without calling her name or even her station. She watched his hand, not his face. She imagined the bead lying against the leather and felt an odd steadiness. He stepped into the corridor. The house breathed out the breath it had been holding. The officers' voices faded into the privacy of courtyard air. The vicar tucked the ledger deeper under his cloak, as if keeping a child warm. Inez walked with Sister Catalina back to the quiet where labor and prayer make a web strong enough to catch falling days. The prioress set the folded paper, the one from the sleeve, into a small wooden box beneath the crucifix in her office and rested her palm on the lid, a gesture as old as Mother's. In the nave, the candles held their small flames steady. In the chapter house, the benches stood as they had stood before men brought their words. The prince reached the outer gate and did not look over his shoulder. He did not need to. He could feel the house standing behind him, intact. The morning had begun with a lie, formed into a sentence. It closed with a vow, made without words, and the simple human knowledge that the path forward would be walked with open eyes and mouths, disciplined to speak only what must be said. The great hall did not wait for a trumpet. It filled the morning on its own, solemn and full, the way old rooms do when they know they are about to hold more than voices. He stepped in without escort and felt the cold of the stone climb his boots. Candles burned in pairs along the walls, their light swallowed by tapestries that had watched 100 smaller storms. The council had assembled already. A treasurer pale and pinched, a duke with eyes like shutters, a secretary eager in quill and caution, and the king's confessor seated as if prayer were a throne. He took the table assigned to him by rank and by habit. He did not reach for the chair's arms. He kept his hands on the wood and let the grain pull his breath into a steady pattern. The bishop's vicar stood near the far end, cloak unassuming, ring visible only when it needed to be. A small sealed ledger lay close to his hand, ordinary as bread. The prioress's deposition had been sent ahead by the sacristan, written in a hand that made virtue look practical. The chamberlain spoke first, the tone that of a man introducing a subject no one wished to name but all had come to hear. He looked at the prince only long enough to be correct. "There are irregularities," he said, "that require daylight." A murmur moved like a low wind through men who felt the temperature change. The treasurer dabbed at his upper lip with a cloth he had brought for the purpose of dignity. The confessor folded his hands and let his eyelids lower the tiniest degree. The prince said nothing. He had come to do one thing clearly, and clarity, he knew, preferred silence for its foundation. The vicar broke the seal. He did not display the ledger. The room was not a theatre. He opened it as a book opens when it expects to be read by a careful mind. The ink inside had dried in 2 hands, one elegant, one rushed. He did not read names aloud. He pointed with a finger where initials appeared beside numbers, where a symbol marked authorization, where sums drowned under words like necessary that taste like smoke when they burn truth. Sums marked for charity redirected under private authorization, he said, light and firm. Dates in a sequence that cannot be called chance. Marginal signs that correspond to the private crest used by the confessor in matters of conscience. The paper bears a watermark from a chancery that does not issue receipts to air. The treasurer's throat worked against a swallow that tried to masquerade as a cough. The confessor's gaze did not lift, but the small muscle in his cheek made its own admission. The prince raised nothing, lowered nothing. He watched the room receive the spine of the argument, the plainness of proof, the absence of flourish. His father's house had taught him to prefer blunt tools for roots. The notary who had flourished copies in the chapter house stood at the table's edge with his case closed now, not open to serve performance. He cleared his throat only to keep his head above the water rising toward his chin. He offered a question that sounded like a prayer for relevance. "These initials," he said, "are only letters. Letters are cousins to coincidence." "Numbers hate coincidence," the vicar said, and closed the book on that. The chamberlain spread his fingers on the table and laid out the choices the way a man lays out knives and spoons, each with its purpose. "We have a ledger under seal. We have a deposition from a religious house under oath. We have a novice," he added, glancing at the prince because everyone had told him to, "who handled a document not meant for her hands and did not convert it to sin. We have a pattern of funds diverted from their stated uses. What we do not have," the confessor said gently, finally lifting his head, "is the soul of the matter. A kingdom under strain cannot live on perfect accounts. Charity must sometimes dress itself in prudence's coat." The prince heard the sentence whole and flat. He had ached under such sentences since boyhood, told to him beside beds where his father's fever steamed and the air smelled of medicines that did not break fevers. He kept his voice even. "Prudence does not erase names from ledgers," he said. "It writes them." The confessor's mouth softened. "Highness, your zeal honors your station, but the church, the vicar said, polite as a rap on a door, is not a purse." Silence landed with weight. Men shifted and found that there was not much room to move. The chamberlain looked toward the prince and lifted a brow that asked whether the heir would have the heir's say. The prince did not leave his chair to do it. He did not need the floor. He had the ledger and the vicar and the maintenance of an old house depending on the tone of a few sentences. "Once," he said, as if recalling the small lesson of a much younger morning, "a boy was told that duty meant taking whatever load was handed him and walking with it without complaint. He did so until his back no longer felt the difference between just and unjust weight. Today, I say that duty also means setting down what was put on us by hands that lied about why they were loading us." He looked at the table, not at the faces. "I will not carry the rot that others hid under alms and prayers. If this ledger says what the vicar says it does, we will answer with the courage our fathers expected when they gave us this house to keep. I ask that the confessor be relieved of his office while penance is arranged, that the treasurer be suspended pending inquiry, that the notary present his sources in person and under oath. I will attend a service today for the mercy that lets us do this without breaking the faith of those who never touched these papers." The sentence did not lift. It settled. The chamberlain's quill scratched at a paper prepared for this moment, because men who love order write orders in advance of truth when they are wise. The secretary breathed like a man allowed to come up from a dive. The treasurer went grey as slate around the lips. The confessor stood. His face did not break. He asked for leave to withdraw to a house that kept silence and bread and the whip of repentance. He spoke as if he had chosen it. The vicar inclined his head, not to the man's virtue, but to the machinery of the law that had finally found purchase. "Guards," the chamberlain said, and the men whom no one noticed most mornings stepped forward with the modest competence that keeps kingdoms from cracking in the middle. The prince did not feel triumph. He felt a weight removed that left the skin sore underneath. He rested one hand over the bead in his glove and one on the table. He did not look to the door yet. He knew what came next. Truth, without the face of the person it would have crushed if not held right, would be a brittle victory. "Bring the novice," he said, not with command but with precision. "Only as far as she must come, no farther." The door opened to admit a small procession that snared the room's attention without trying. The prioress entered first, because that was her duty, lantern in hand, though the hall already burned with lights. The bishop's vicar had asked it of her. She had not refused. Sister Catalina followed with Inez, who walked steadily, veil straight, hands calm. She did not lower her eyes to the humbling point. She let them be low enough to be proper and high enough to see what she needed to see. She felt the air in this room differently than the air in her house. It wove itself around rank and title in loops she could see, but not desire. Her heart beat carefully. Her throat remembered the grill and the iron smell of fear. She kept the rosary tucked deep in her sleeve, the broken knot near her skin. A small, firm pain applied at intervals to keep her from floating away from the ground. The chamberlain nodded to her as one nods to an instrument that will play one essential note and be put away. The vicar gestured to a place by the prioress. The prince did not move. She knew where he was without looking. The room pivoted around that knowledge whether she wished it or not. The chamberlain's voice made a small circle for her to step into. "Sister," he said, the title given to the woman the world saw, not the one who had begun in hunger and dust. "Tell what you know." She did not begin with apology. She began with the smallest sentence that refused a lie. "A man passed a bundle through the grill during a visitation," she said. "I was told to carry it because I am obedient. When I saw the seal, I feared disobedience would be safer than obedience. I hid what I could. I fainted later, from fear and hunger." She glanced once at the prioress's lantern, and its light caught a gold line in her gaze. "A man not of this house helped me rise." The notary shifted in his seat, ready to pounce on the last line, tasting the old joy of scandal. "Name him," he said. She turned her head as if he had spoken to the air. "I will not." "Why?" he asked, with pleasure. "Because the help I received does not change the ledger," she said. "Because my duty is to speak of what was passed through our grill, not who passed through our nave. Because I prefer to shame no one if shame does not mend anything." The vicar leaned a fraction forward, the way a man leans when he sees a small stone reseated properly into a wall. The chamberlain nodded once. "Enough," he said, to the notary, and to the appetite that had oiled his question. "You have served the truth that needed your voice. The rest can travel without you." Inez bowed her head, then raised it. Her eyes found the prince's hands because she could not allow herself to find the face. She saw the glove and the way the leather tightened and loosened over his knuckles with his breath. She recognized the pressure of a small round beneath it and felt something at the base of her throat loosen for the first time since the candle guttered hours before. The council made its decrees, the duties spoken like oaths broken into pieces small enough for writing. The confessor withdrew, a guard at his shoulder, and the absence of a congregation ringing in his ears. The treasurer went out a different door, flanked by men who did not wish to be noticed either. The notary promised to bring originals, and in the promise told everyone that he would not be able to, because men promise most when they have least to offer. The prioress waited for the last flourish to finish, then stepped forward with a separate paper. She did not tremble when being seen. Her authority did not come from eyes. It came from the invisible argument that builds a life into a habit. "This house has documents regarding the conditions of this child's entrance," she said. "Her relatives left debts at our door and took our door as payment. Form was respected and truth was bent. We ask for a remedy the law allows. Her release from vows that were not consent." The vicar took the paper and read it with the speed of a man looking for what he already knew was there. He lifted his gaze to the chamberlain and then to the prince, because it mattered to look at both when making a decision that would be called spiritual and lived as human. "It is within law," he said. "If granted, the child remains under the house's roof until the world can receive her without harm." The chamberlain glanced at the prince. The prince felt the wind change in a place it rarely changes. He did not argue. He did not ask for more than what decency demands. "Grant it," he said. The word was small enough to pass under doors. It was large enough to change a life. Inez felt it settle around her shoulders like a cloak that would fit only after an hour or a day or a year of wearing it. She put a hand to her sleeve, the knot pressed, and then comforted. They left the council chamber together, not shoulder to shoulder, but bound by a thread stronger than silk. The vicar kept the ledger under the cloak his old horse had dampened with sweat. The prioress held the paper that had cut her daughter loose from a rope men had tied. Sister Catalina walked with her back straight and her mouth ready with a psalm if one were needed. He did not follow them past the door. He stood a moment in the cold that envied the warmth of their passage, and then turned toward the oratory off the great hall. He lit a candle. He did not pray for favor. He thanked the wood and wax and stone for standing, as they had stood while men rearranged their order on them. When he left the palace, the city had tilted toward evening. A clear, thin light leaned through the streets and found every edge. He passed under it and let it mark him. He did not call for a horse beyond the ordinary. He rode to the convent door and dismounted in the shadow that had become familiar only because the day had been longer than any day in his memory. Brother Martin opened to him with the same practice as always. He was a hinge made of bone and prayer. The prioress met them at the turn. She did not ask for a report. She read it in his face the way one reads a margin note when the main text has exhausted itself. "The child is in the chapel," she said. He went there without sending a message ahead. The nave received him with its old quiet. A few townspeople knelt close to the back, murmuring a hymn that reminded the air not to change too quickly. Near a side altar, Inez stood with Sister Catalina, her veil lighter, her posture both humble and settled in a way that did not break humility. He did not go to her. He went to the rail and set a small linen-wrapped object on the cool stone. He withdrew his hand, took it back to his chest, as if empty were the right posture now. The prioress appeared at his side, took the bundle, unwrapped it, and tightened her lips only to keep them from softening. The bead rolled into her palm. She nodded once and crossed to Inez. Sister Catalina produced a needle and thread from the pocket where her whole house lived when called upon. The work required no ceremony, and so it had all the ceremony of what keeps a world intact. Inez held the rosary steady in both hands while the prioress threaded the bead and tied off the knot with a square firmness. The thread rasped and then smoothed under her fingers. A circle became a circle again. She did not lift it to her lips. She lifted her eyes across the nave. He stood at the rail, one hand against the wood as if the rail were a ship's edge and the air a sea. His face was not the face of victory. It held tenderness and a fatigue that reached for rest without shame. He saw the bead in its place and let out a breath that was not theatrical. It was simply necessary. Sister Catalina drifted back, as women do when they know a moment belongs to two people and can be watched without being broken. The prioress, satisfied that the small was mended so the large might also heal, turned away to attend to a lay sister's whispered need. The townspeople finished the hymn and left the echoes in the rafters like birds that would not peck at anyone. They met at the middle, not at the rail or the altar or the door. They met where the nave holds no furniture, and the stone keeps the prints of feet that have come and gone for years. He did not reach for her hands. She did not reach for his. They stood close enough that breath could be read, but not stolen. "You are free," he said. "I am obliged," she answered, and then corrected herself because she would not let a new life begin with the wrong word. "I am able." He smiled, the first one that had no guard in it. "Able is a word I could live on for months." She glanced at his glove and then at his eyes. "You kept it." "I keep very little," he said. "I kept this." "Now you keep something else," she said. "Not mine. Ours." The word landed between them and did not break anything. It made a space in which a future could breathe without suffocating. He nodded toward the prioress. "She will keep you safe until you want something else." "I do not want anything else," she said, and then added, "Not beyond what is lawful." "What is lawful is more generous than most men admit," he said. They pretend the law is a small room, so they can fill it with themselves. You have widened it today, she said. We have, he returned. They stood quiet. The chapel did what chapels do when words have rubbed themselves thin. It gave back the sound of heartbeats and the rustle of cloth and made them holy without anyone having to say so. I cannot ask you for what men ask in these stories, he said softly. I cannot stand before a witness and bind you to me with a priest's hands and a father's blessing. I cannot put you where public joy will not turn to public argument. She shook her head, once, with conviction that did not make noise. I did not come to a grill to receive an ending that requires a stage. I needed a beginning that requires a daily bread and a truth that does not hurt people who do not deserve hurt. His throat went tight. Then we will live like that. She looked at the floor, then back at him, and smiled in the way that tells a man that survival can be more beautiful than triumph. We will live like that. He reached into his glove and brought out his empty palm as if to show he had nothing hidden. She took her rosary and, without touching him, lifted it just enough for the small repaired bead to catch the last of the sun. The light ran through it and briefly made a star on the stone between them. Keep it near you, she said. Not as a secret, as a promise. I will, he said. They did not draw closer. They did not need to. The distance between them had become part of the meaning. He bowed his head, not to rank and not to rule, but to a woman whose courage had not cost anyone else their soul. She inclined hers in answer, not as a subject to a prince, but as a person to the one who had chosen the same narrow path when the wide one had been there for the taking. The prioress returned then, not to scold, not to stage, but to bless in the way she was allowed. She did not lift her hand. She lifted the work of her house and made it visible. You will come to the parlourtry when you need to speak, she said to him. You will ask through the turn. You will not require what I cannot give. You will bring nothing that smells of court into a place that smells of bread and beeswax. Yes, mother, he said, with the kind of obedience that makes a man taller. She turned to Inez. You will eat with the lay sisters tonight. You will sleep in the same bed. You will take no new burdens for 3 days. You will let your body remember that God likes his children alive. Yes, mother, Inez said, and felt gratitude open inside her like a door that had been stuck. The prince stepped back as the prioress stepped forward. He would leave now, because leaving at the right time is how one keeps a thing from being devoured by curiosity. He went as far as the door and then looked once more. She was already turned toward the small acts that would make tomorrow bearable. He put his hand to the wood. He did not kiss it. He let it be wood. Outside, the air tasted of evening and of the smoke that meant kitchens were working. He stood under it and let it write itself into his lungs. He could do this. He could be the man who made a kingdom possible without turning a woman into a story he could not finish. He took one step toward the gate and felt the bead's absence in his glove like a fullness. He did not touch his breast to find it. He knew where it was. He knew what it meant. Behind him, the hymn rose for vespers, plain and strong. Ahead, the street bent toward night and toward the day after. He smiled, and the smile did not hurt. He walked into the hour with his shoulders unarmored, and his heart arranged in the quiet order he had envied in stone. And the chapel kept their promise safe, while the city learned the shape of its new mercy. Thank you so much for listening to this story, all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.